I can't tell you how happy and pleased I am that we're celebrating 40 years. I think JLT had a big impact on the development of our field, and it's amazing how the field has progressed from way back in the 70s to now. It's just totally unbelievable. You would have never projected what you're doing now back then. Just no way. Um, so I really appreciate all the work that people here have done. I want to second what Doug said. It's people like you that made a big difference in keeping JLT viable and at the forefront. And so I want to thank you personally for not having the journal that I start flop. And so it's been a long time, but it's really contributed to this to the technology advancement. I like to say a few words about starting the journal. Starting the journal typically isn't too bad. It's pretty straightforward. JLT certainly has to be an exception to that. If you go back into the 70s, there wasn't a journal for Lightwave. And so everybody published in just about any journal they wanted to publish. And there were at least 12 that I could think of where people were publishing. And so what that meant is to keep up with the field, you had to read 12 journals or some large number of journals. And most people felt this was a burden. The other thing that was happening then was it was becoming obvious that fiber optics and light wave was taking off. And so really the time was, it was felt that it's time to really have our own journal. Um, it turns out that I was up at RCA Laboratories. I was up there on a contract review, and I was talking to Henry Cursell. Henry and I discussed the need for the journal, and we both agreed that we wanted to push for it. Now, most of you don't know Henry because I see very little gray hair out there. But Henry was a vice president of technology at RCA Labs. He was an expert in diode lasers, semiconductor diode lasers at the time. But more importantly, he was the first president of Quantum Electronic and Application Society, QEAS. QEAS, you may never have heard of, but that later changed its name to LEOS, which later changed its name to Photonics Society. So that was the initial Photonics Society by another name. So Henry was the first president, and that activity was really very helpful. He knew his way around the IEEE better than I did, which was going to come in handy in developing the journal. Who would have thought when we got into this that we would have had to jump through so many hoops? So we agreed, we called up Dean Anderson. He was the second president of QEAS, current president at the time. And we got him on board. Both Henry and I knew him pretty well, so that wasn't really hard to do. And he was at Rockwell International at the time. So we proposed it to the board, the QEAS board, to start a new journal. And, you know, we thought it was an obvious thing to do because the technology was obviously taking off. We got a lot of pushback. The pushback came in the form of, we don't want another journal. We have too many to read already. And so, you know, and we explained, well, we want to be the journal for Lightwave. And not everybody bought that. And so we couldn't get it through initially, the board. So what we proposed to do was run a couple of special issues of JQE on fiber optics to show we could attract the papers. And I was the editor, guest editor for that. We ran it, and it was very successful. So we went back to the board, and they approved it. And then Henry Cursell brought it to the TAB, Technical Activities Board of IEEE, and we got their approval. So we thought we were kind of finished, and things were going to sail along very smoothly. We were wrong. The other societies, there were at least 3 or 4 at the time, felt that they couldn't let QEAS take over the fiber optics area, because if you had the journal, you had your foot in the door in doing that. And so they were going to start their own journal, exactly the opposite of what we were set out to do in the first place. So Henry and I went around to various society presidents and executive directors, and lots of conversation, some good, some bad, but we convinced them that it was good to have a single journal. And what we proposed, and they accepted it, was to have a committee run the journal with representatives from interested societies. So initially there were 5 societies that signed up for it, okay? Electron devices, QEAS, ComSoc, ultrasonics, it turned out, and MTT. Okay, those are all IEEE societies if you're not familiar with them. And so they signed up, and it turned out that there were 2 other societies that wanted in because they were publishing papers. So we were up to 7. And then there were 2 more that wanted to join because they thought that they were going to make some money publishing the journal. And they had nothing to do with guided wave optics. And so we had 9 sitting around the table, 9 societies. It's the next barrier that came up then was, where was this group going to sit, in which society? Was it going to be in Leos or ComSoc or whatever? And because again, the one that captured that group and ran the journal would be associated with the technology. And so most of the societies had a strategic interest in not having that happen. And so again, we proposed to have it as a standalone group. And since there were 9 societies that had signed up to it, we brought it to TAB, and they approved it because 9 societies wanted it. Okay, so now we were ready. IEEE was in good shape. We were ready to go. In the first meeting that we had with the group, QEAS brought up the Optical Society. There was rumors, excuse me, there were rumors that OSA might start their own journal. And we didn't want that as a group. But, and so we proposed that they be invited to be another society. It was interesting. It was interesting dynamics around the table, because QEAS had a lot of members in common with OSA, and so it felt natural. But a lot of the societies didn't, and this was a foreign society to them, and so they didn't want any part of OSA, and so a lot more conversations and so on and so forth. And if you know IEEE politics, it takes a lot of time. But we talked them into it, and they had asked me to be the editor at that first meeting, which I agreed to do. So then they asked me to go to OSA and float the idea. So I called Joris Quinn up, who I knew very well. I had worked with Joris previously on a problem with OFC. And so we had worked together, and we solved that problem. I don't know if you knew Joris. He passed away, of course, but he was a master of getting things done. And politically, he was soft-spoken, and and easy to get along with, but he was extremely effective. So I called him, and he kind of was receptive to the idea, and he invited me to come up to OSA. And so I drove across town and went up there one afternoon, and we chatted about it. And it's basically a strategy chat. And he said, "Okay, I'll take it from here." And I don't know what he did, but he called me back up and said, "We're in." So now we had the joint journal established. Um, the first task was to publish the first papers, of course, and get them in. So we started quarterly. Then the second year was bi-monthly, and then the third year was annually. Excuse me, monthly that we published it. We made the effort to tie it to OFC because OFC was growing just as much as the community. And we ran a special issue from selected papers from OFC. And we've done that through the years consistently. And so the journal was off and running. And, um, the main thing I did was kept asking for more pages. The budget was limited. In fact, a couple of the societies dropped out because the first few years were losses in the budget, which you would expect starting something up, a loss leader. So a couple that thought they were going to make it rich uh, dropped off, and we ended up with the 7 plus the OSA, and that's where we are today. And so after 6 years, I stepped down, and I think it was who was the next one? It wasn't Alan. It was Ron. Ron Alphiness was the next editor. Who was Don Keck? Yeah, Don Keck. Yeah, right. Okay, that's right. Yeah, Don's not here today either. But let me turn it over to Alan now, and he can pick up the second 6 years or beyond that. Alan.
Tom, thank you very much. Let's see, I think I have just a 2, 3 slides. This is the first. So unfortunately, Doug Hargis is not here, but he was basically to me. I even wrote an editorial where the title was about Doug because he was really the heart and soul of the journal. And even he really felt it was like he cared about it. He cared about it. He worried about it. And this was from OFC in 2005, a little photo. And I think he's been it for like over 20 years, which means more than 50% of the time it's under Doug. I mean, Doug has really made it happen. And absolutely wonderful person. Next, please. So the two people that I interacted most with was Paul Shoemate and Linda Matarazzo. Linda was running the Leos publications. Paul was the executive director, but Paul, you heard from Tom about starting a journal. So Paul had a lot of experience also with the IEEE Photonics technology letters and starting that one. And Paul also cared a lot. He had been part, even before being executive director of Leos, he was involved with the coordinating committees, the steering committees of JLT, these multi-society things. So he had, tremendous also just insight and I think love of the journal, really. A lot of his own work was published in JLT as well. Unfortunately, both of them are no longer with us, but they were great. I relied on them tremendously. You heard from Tom about page budgets. I'm a researcher. What do I know about page budgets? But I quickly learned that if you overestimate or underestimate, you could lose money. I was like, how is that possible? And Paul was the master of page budgets. He taught me about them. Next, please. So the other thing was I was editor from like 2001 to 2007 ish. And during that time, as many of you know, that's the beginning of the cell phones when people were really, you had your cell phone, you were starting to do, to do your activities also in the car. So there was an IEEE summer topicals up in Montreal, above Montreal, and I was driving from the airport up to the IEEE to I think it was in Mont Blanc. But one thing was happening was that I was the cell phone was dying. It kept on dying, and then I had to like be recharging it. So I was calling up Paul and Linda and Doug. But that call was mostly with Paul actually, and I kept on getting dropped and then coming back in. And also, I don't know if you, it's hard to see, but Route 15 and Route 117, these were these two highways that it was really funny. I can't, I don't know. For those of you who have like in Canada, Est and Ouest, I have no clue if it's East and West. I don't, nothing. So but and I knew you had to get onto the 117 to get up to the thing. The 15 was the main highway, but they crossed each other several times. It was before Google Maps. So every time I saw 117, I was getting off. And I must have gotten off like 10 times. And, um, and I kept on asking for directions at a gas station, but nobody spoke English. And so I'm getting on the phone and off the phone with Paul. Okay. Also around this time, there was a dead spot between my home and in USC where I would call Linda a lot. And there was a dead zone and I would drop. The call would drop. And so this was like a few months apart. Paul pulls me over to the side and he gave me a little bit of tough love. And he said, about how to really, and he did it privately. Nobody ever knew, but about how to really work with other people when you're on the phone and probably not be on the phone, especially when it might drop. And it was a little frustrating. Another time when Linda also, she basically said, it just kept on dropping and, it was her time. I had to respect her time. And boy, oh boy, she was absolutely right. So I learned a lot in sort of those early days about how to work. Um, what's interesting, again, just to pick up from what Tom was saying, was one of the things that when I became editor, which I had no idea beforehand, was this issue of the coordinating committee, the steering committee. All I knew, you submit papers, even when you're an associate editor, you don't really know about these committees, but they become a big deal. And so you think of like Forrest Gump. What did Forrest Gump say? Life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what gonna get. That was not JLT. I thought like there's all these societies would be pulling in different directions, and all of a sudden things were going to become a little chaotic, and that's not what happened at all. You knew what you were going to get. When you look back 40 years ago, high quality in certain areas that you're always picking up the new technologies, different societies coming together to champion, to provide insight, to provide help. Uh, that happened. It's amazing. What you set up, Tom, is still basically the same structure. So you open up JLT, you know what you're going to get, which is a high quality journal, and at the time for a very long time, and today, right, a lot of conference papers where you want to expand on them in a high quality venue. It's JLT in this area. So again, uh, I don't think I came away from one steering coordinating committee without a bunch of action items from people who suggested things. So it was Tom, it was Karen Lou, because there was a few years where there wasn't an OFC special issue, and they said, well, that's a really important thing. We should have that again. And then we started it again, and I think that's and it's continued. It's looked forward to every year. Um, my last steering and coordinating committee, we took a vote. The committee took a vote. I excused myself right afterwards to call Connie to say, because I was all excited because she was going to be the next editor. So I remember leaving the meeting downstairs in Piscataway. I was like in the hallway. Like, so anyway, with that, I'll turn it over to Connie. Thank you.
Well, it's really difficult to follow the act that Tom and Ellen had spoken. So, first of all, greetings, everyone. I feel that I haven't. There are a lot of new faces for me. It's also been a long, long time. So I was editor-in-chief 2007, taking over from Ellen until 2012. I have to say, Newton said you stand on the shoulders of giants. I have been entirely flying on giant's wings. So really, I have to thank you all for building JLT. And all I did was to carry on. I guess the only thing that I felt at the time rather confusing, similar to Alan said, is the 7 or 8 bosses that one has to please. And the steering and coordinating committee meetings were indeed extremely nerve-wracking from the very beginning. Most of them were on the phone, actually half of them, so I couldn't really meet the people. Well, over the past 3 years, we have experienced all of that, but that time was kind of rare that you like to see people in person and to be able to see them, see their gesture, and understand, you know, how am I doing, and so on and so forth. But it was because of Doug and Paul Shumate and Linda, indeed, that I was able to glide through. And 2007 was really, or that period of time was really actually a very interesting time in the following way. I had not known anything about impact factor. That those two words didn't mean anything to me in 2007. I guess just remotely from from a colleague from chemistry, they told me, "Oh, you've been publishing in this journal. Oh, the impact factor is less than 1." I said, "Wow, really?" Okay, then that's when I started to look for the meaning of the two words. And so indeed, it haunted us around 2008, 2009, and that became a major task. How to raise the bar, how to increase impact factor, how to understand how the numbers were done, calculated. And remember, that was the time when I think the library were still using paper copies, and a lot of people were still mailing in their manuscripts. So it was really in the transition between the dark ages and today, the smartphones and so on and so forth. Very interesting times, I must say. And so we used a few different mechanisms. Certainly, we see the surge of submission of papers. It was just impossible to handle so many papers all at once and to find reviewers who were willing to review. Some of the papers we sent and were rejected 3 times, 4 times by reviewers not being able to review them. So causing delays and so on and so forth. Of course, that was also a major concern. Let's see. And finally, we found a good method, which is also followed Ellen's footstep, is by inviting excellent review papers. And some of those review articles can get you very nice citations. So I don't know whether that's still a good mechanism or not, maybe not. But anyway, that was, again, during the transition of times, we tried a few different things. But all in all, I have to say it was a great experience, and I enjoyed so much working with associate editors. We also expanded associate editor pool from around the globe. We enjoyed working with reviewers, and most of all, I really need to thank many of the associate editors. And that time we also started at a deputy editor position. So I want to thank them. And then finally, of course, Doug and Paul Shoemate and Linda and my predecessors. And with that, I'd like to turn the table to Peter.
Thanks, Connie. So I thought about a couple of anecdotes with JLT and me. So I submitted my first JLT paper when I was still a PhD student in Vienna. And at that time, it was still mailed in. So you had to mail a bunch of paper over the ocean, and then you wait for eternity. And then you get your reviews back, and they were not so good, not so good. And then you submit your revised version, also a big stack of paper. And by that time, I had started at Bell Labs, and the reviews were still not back from the re-revision. So I contacted the editor-in-chief back then, who was Rod Alphaness. And at that time, I just started. So Rod was my boss's boss. So I asked, what's going on with that paper? I'm still waiting for the revisions. And he said, don't worry, they'll come. And then I passed by Ellen Gnauk's office, and what is on his desk is my paper. So that was fun back then. And of course, Ellen being Ellen, he's a superstar. And I didn't say a word, of course. I just silently ignored what I saw, and I waited patiently for the paper to be reviewed, and it was reviewed and it was accepted at the end. But that was my first real interaction with JLT. So when I took over from Connie, and Connie said that the very important thing, the impact factor, was something that really was important at the time. If you wanted to make a journal successful, you needed to boost the impact factor. You like it or not, doesn't matter. I don't personally like the impact factor, and I've always been vocal about that, but doesn't matter. You have to play with where the game is. So I studied the impact factor very, very carefully. I studied, I looked exactly how it's calculated. Went to the databases. I found mistakes. I went to the Web of Science. I found omissions there. I contacted whoever Reuters or whoever was the company behind it, and made sure that all the JLT papers are actually put into that database so that the impact factor is properly calculated. And in a journal that's not commercial, non-for-profit, not like Nature or Science, in a journal that's a community journal, you can't play tricks like Nature and Science do with their editorial selections to boost the impact factor with a PR machine behind it. You have to be smart about it and understand it well. And if you understand the impact factor, then you can boost it. So what is important for the impact factor? It's everything that was published in the last 2 or 3 years. I forgot the formula already. So that's when we established the JLT award. And how is the JLT award awarded? It's exactly using the impact factor metrics underneath the hood. It's like, what are the papers published in the last 2 or 3 years that got the most citations or the most downloads? I mean, we look at multiple metrics, but the history of the JLT award is a means to reinforce that metric so we can boost the impact factor of the journal. That's behind it. And also, Connie mentioned it, the invited papers, the special issues, they gather a lot of citations. So you want that. So we got many special issues on board for OFC, ECOG, many others. Also, I mean, not just to boost the impact factor, of course. This is all high quality stuff, but there is a sales and marketing aspect associated with that. That's very important. Now, those who know me, no bullshit publications is super important to me. So we try to have the highest technical standards out there. From the editorial board, only really top known researchers being on there, and making sure that we live up to, at that time, what I believe is the core of an IEEE journal, which is the engineering. One of the E stands for engineering in the IEEE, and that's often forgotten. We're not as scientific. We're not an organization that does science only. And as such, engineering and real world applications are super important. So that's what I placed a lot of focus on. And in the steering committee, which was also mentioned several times, a very important committee where you meet twice a year and discuss the strategy of a journal. I always ran that journal as a product, sort of, because it is a product for a customer. And later on, Karen Liu, who I don't think she's here. She is at the show floor. She now works for Nubis. I got to know her at the steering committee. And we immediately jibed, because she's a marketing person and she wanted the same thing. How do we market this thing? How do we get it out there? So that was very important. Yeah, so I think I said most of what I wanted to say. I'll close with one other anecdote, just to tell you that leading a journal is a lot of work. I calculate, so what happened in my case, my son took violin, went to a violin school every Saturday in New York. So I drove in the early morning and was there until the late evening. So I had 10 hours of pure JLT time every Saturday. And if you rack that up over 6 years, including the time you spent during the week on it, it's way more than a year. It's probably between 1.5 and 2 full-time years of work. And if you calculate that in terms of salary, then you know what Bell Labs invested in that journal in terms of money. That's something that cannot be left unmentioned. I mean, it's a huge amount, and it's a huge amount of work, but it's great. And when I came to the end of my tenure as EIC, I got a present, and it was like an Apple Watch. And I'm not so much the technology geek. I do have an iPhone, but otherwise I don't have any Apple products. But my son does, the violin son, right? So I come home with the Apple Watch, and his eyes glaze over, and guess who owns that watch now? Okay, so yeah, with that, I give it over to Gabriella.
Good afternoon to everyone. Well, it's a great pleasure to speak. It's a little bit frightening to speak after Peter, as was a little bit frightening to be the AC of JLT after Peter and after all these great people before me. What I can say more than having been said already? Well, I can tell you what happened at the very beginning when I was voting in by the coordinating committee. It was October, I think, 2018, and Peter wrote me, "Great, congratulations. It would be great if you could come to New Jersey in 1 week from now," I guess it was, for the coordinating committee meeting. So yeah, okay, I took a flight and went there. And then I found out why he was so, so happy for me to be there, because basically we spent like 2 hours in his office at Bell Labs, and he told me everything about JLT, everything. 2 hours, I took a lot of notes. So he explained to me everything, how everything was working, how everything in 2 hours, I remember. And I remember he was very happy. And I didn't understand why he was so happy to end his term at JLT. So JLT, it's great being EIC. Now I understand why, because it's really, really a lot of work. So I think I have some slides. Okay, great. So I just put together a few graphs to show you what has been happening along the years of JLT and what has been happening in the past 4 years. I've been the IC of JLT for 4 years 2 months and, and 8 days right now. And basically, as you can see, everything is growing. Growing the number of submissions, the number of published pages, number of published papers. And if you look at the scale, the number of submissions has been growing a lot in the past few years, and the associate editors of JLT are aware of this. So basically, we doubled the number of submissions in the past 10 years. So when I started, I tried to do everything as Peter taught me. So I follow all his instructions, how to handle papers, pre-screen papers, and so on and so forth. But I do not have sons or daughters who play violin, so I didn't have so much time during the weekend to pre-screen papers. So I started with 30 papers per week, then they got 35, 40, 45 papers. So it got really, I didn't have weekends anymore, basically. So what I did was to try and change a little bit things. So I increased the number of associate editors. You can see from that plot over there that the number of editorial board members almost doubled in the past few years. I increased the number of deputy editors. Thanks a lot to the deputy editors that now are helping me pre-screening papers. So now they are divided by five deputy editors, great deputy editors who are expert in the field of the submitted papers. So that's very important. So yes, everything increased. Also the impact factor kept increasing. And I remember when my first year, basically the impact factor from 2019 and 2019 went up from, I think, 3.5 to 4.1. And everyone saying, congratulations to me. They say, okay, I did nothing. That's all, all what the others did. And also the following year, congratulations, it's keeping going up, but actually, as the impact factor is calculated, it was everything that was done before. Well, I was an associate editor, so it was also my a little bit of also my I contributed to it, but as an associate editor. So now I'm waiting for the next year's impact factor, hoping they will continue growing in the future, because now it's starting to, count what we have done in the past 4 years. So what else? Well, what happened in the past 4 years that didn't happen before? Well, a worldwide pandemic that impacted all our lives a lot. No, it wasn't my fault. but actually, if you look at the number of submissions, there was no impact in the number of submissions. So our lives were all impacted very much, but not JLT. People continued submitting papers, because I guess we had more time to write papers, not to go in the lab. But so everything went quite smoothly in that sense, in the sense of journal. Of course, we experienced some drop in the number of submissions to the ECOC and OFC special issues, but it was because the conferences were impacted, not really because the journals, the number of submissions went down. So I need to thank everyone, all the associate editor and deputy editors and authors also, who continue to trust JLT, because I heard that other journals had a drop in number of submissions during the years of the pandemic. So that's really great. One thing I have to mention, that I have asked the help of the deputy editors to pre-screen papers, and they're being great. But Doug and Sonal, they're still two of them. So they actually have been helping a lot in handling so many submissions. They still are. So they couldn't make it to San Diego this year. I'm very sorry about this, but I think we owe both of them a big thank you for all they have done and they've been done for JLT. As I said, well, one thing I did last week to reflect this increase in numbers, because we really, JLT is doing really well. The number of submissions is growing up. The only thing which is not going up is the acceptance ratio, which was reduced a little bit from 50 to 40% in the past few years. But we still publish a lot of papers, a lot of pages. So I went to my office, look for the printed collections in the past few years and took this picture, which reflects the increase in thickness of printed collection of JLT from 2008 to 2020. So we went from 1 centimeter to 4 centimeter, and that's why we stopped sending complementary copies to all the authors of submitted papers. And the reason is that the authors started to complain. I started receiving email from authors saying, why are you sending us these huge journals that nobody reads in print, because everything is becoming digital. I guess no one of us now go and to look a paper in a printed collection. So that's and now I've been told that now this print collection, which contains 4 issues, will be split in 2. So we will go from 2 kilograms to 1 kilograms of paper. And well, yeah, as I was said, now we read almost everything online. Well, some older people, maybe like me, print papers because we are not very much used to to read them on a screen, but everything is online. The world is changing. The world is becoming digital. Everything is online. And so the last thing I wanted to mention is that also JLT is becoming more social, has become more social. So since 2019, JLT is both on Twitter and a few months later on LinkedIn. And we are close to 900 followers in LinkedIn, slightly less in Twitter. But we are trying to, well, to evolve with the world, as JLT has always tried to do. But now these changes are really impressive. We try to engage young people, and trying to engage young people it's not very simple. I'm not social at all. I got social accounts just because I got social accounts, but I don't use them. And so I need to thank our publicity editor, Paola Parolari, sitting there, who started this and she's publishing everything relevant about the journal in the social media. And also thanks to her, these pages are quite popular. So here is an example of what has been published in the past few months and few years by Paula. So I think this is important. This is one of the biggest changes that we did in these 4 years, because everything else is going, I think, in the same way as before. Everything is going good. The difference is the huge number of submissions, but now we do not send papers by mail, luckily, which makes everything easier. But we still have the problems in finding good reviewers, exactly as it was before. It's easier to contact them, but not so easy to get very good reviews. So we really thank everyone who contributed to this. I think, well, Peter didn't tell this before, but he always says a journal is as good as its editorial board. I remember this. He said this many times, and I totally agree with him. So thank you very much to everyone who contributed to the success of JLT, to the associate editors, deputy editors, to the authors, to the organizers of special issues, to the member of the coordinating and steering committee, which at the very first of my term, I saw as, well, not enemies, but I was a little bit scared to interact with them. But now it's no more like this. I see them as friends and very helpful counselor for the direction of JLT. So a big thank you to everyone, and last but not least, the IEEE staff, because without them we couldn't have achieved what we have achieved in the past few years. So the past 40 years. Okay, so thank you to everyone in this room and in the world.